In the variables video, we talked about how to create and assign values to placeholders that can be used throughout our program. In this video, we'll learn about scope and how it affects where and how you should assign those values. Scope is a term used to describe where specific variables or functions can be accessed and how much they can be seen by other parts of the program. In Lua, all variables and functions are either local or global. On the surface, think of local variables as short-lived and having limited visibility. In contrast, think of global variables as being long-lasting and visible or accessible from anywhere in the program. While you may be tempted to use global variables in all instances, this is not a good practice. In fact, you should use local variables in almost all cases and learn how to place them within the proper scope. As we saw in the variables video, local variables are declared by simply typing the keyword local in front of them like this. In Lua, this creates two local variables of the type string. If you wanted to create these as global variables, you would simply declare them without the leading local keyword as follows. Before we move on, let's talk briefly about chunks, main.lua, and functions. Chunks are blocks of code that are grouped together. Code chunks and what is placed within them go hand in hand with scope. In Lua, the core file which you will work with is main.lua. This core file is the required starting point in every Corona project. It serves as the foundation for the entire program. Eventually, you'll learn how to use modules and attach them to the main.lua. But for now, we'll focus on this core file and how to create chunks within it. The next code example will include a function, so let's briefly discuss what a function is. A function is essentially a self-contained chunk of code which you call from elsewhere in the program. We'll discuss functions in greater depth in the next video, so for now just know that most functions accept one or more parameters and they often return a value for your use. Now let's examine the following code placed within main.lua. This example is simply one local variable and one local function. As explained above, the entire main.lua file is a chunk. And in this example, we're adding a function printName, which is itself another chunk within main.lua. The first rule of working with scope is the above rule. Think of main.lua or any Lua file as a page in a book. Just as you'd read the text in a book from top to bottom, code in Lua is read and acted on from top to bottom, line by line, until it reaches the end. The same basic concept applies to programming in Lua. You must declare a variable or function above any line of code that accesses or references that variable or function. In our previous example, we did exactly that. Notice how the variable firstName is declared above the function printName, which utilizes it. This means that Lua knows about this variable and can use it within the function. If you attempted to write this chunk with the variable declared below the function, Lua will not recognize it and you'll generate an error. The second rule of working with scope is the inside rule. This rule pertains to working with the smaller chunks within larger chunks. Let's examine another basic function. This simple function adds two values together and prints out the sum. However, scope is still a very important part of this function. Notice how we've declared three local variables inside this function: value 1, value 2, and sum. All of these variables live inside the scope of this function and only inside this function. To illustrate this, let's try to access the sum variable outside the function in which it was declared. According to the above rule, you might expect this to work. After all, sum is declared above where we attempt to print it, at least in terms of top-down code order. However, this won't print the correct value because sum is not in the proper scope. It is only visible or accessible inside the chunk where it was declared. Because of these rules, multiple variables can actually have the same name, as long as they don't reside within the same chunk. In this case, it's important to realize that these variables are unique despite having the same name. For example, Although we've declared PositionX twice, each adheres to its scope based on where it was defined. If you run this code in the Corona simulator, the output will be 200 and 100. Why is that? Because we call the movePosition function first. It prints the value of PositionX inside the function, which is 200. Then we write print PositionX on the next line. Lewis sees the value of PositionX above and outside of the function, which is equal to 100. The final important topic related to scope is the Upvalue. Sometimes you'll want to pre-declare a variable before setting its value. This is useful if you use a certain variable in multiple functions throughout the program. For example, player position X. Because several aspects of your program may require this variable or even change its value, the best thing to do is to declare it as an Upvalue. Generally, Upvalue variables should be declared near the beginning of your Lua file, so every function or request further down in the file can see it. While this example is not exactly smart and efficient programming, it demonstrates how a variable can be used by multiple functions as long as the variable is declared as an Upvalue. And that's how to handle scope with variables and functions. In the next video on functions, we'll take a closer look at how to use functions in your app. Learn more about scope in Dr. Brian Burton's book, Learning Mobile Applications and Game Development with Corona SDK, available from www.burtonsmediagroup.com/books.